play. And another foul on board. His third for setting a screen.
Because of physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen. Izzo's dying for a moving screen.
It's that dreaded moving screen.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Moving Screen Podcast. I'm Brendan Quinn of The Athletic, here with Dylan Burkhart, Hoops. It is Wednesday, March 31st. The pod didn't quite make it to April. Dylan, UCLA. We need to find a UCLA podcast and have like some kind of street fight or something.
They took the whole thing down. Just shut down. And someone pointed out on Twitter, Texas Tech took the whole pod down 2 years ago also.
Damn, great point.
And then
COVID
right last year. The pod dies to the same cause, I guess. It's a tough
COVID
way to
by
go
far
out.
the biggest asshole of those three, we'll say. We won't group Texas Tech and UCLA with COVID, but yeah, just getting knocked down year after year. One of these days we'll get a Michigan State national championship game.
That's all. That's the only possible outcome from all this, right?
And then we
that's
never
the way
record
we solve
again.
this. Yeah.
Right? We record the next morning and then we end it. And
it's over.
Never
Done.
speak of it again. Well, yeah, a hard ending for Michigan there, man. You don't. It's a cliche, right, to say you don't want to go out like that, but you don't want to go out like that. Like, it wasn't their best performance. It wasn't the way you want to see a season end with, you want to kind of feel like you got beaten, and Michigan did get beaten, like a lot of credit to UCLA, but also there's just so many things you can circle where you're like kind of everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And if UCLA could have scripted the game, that would have pretty much been it. Like the recipe for an upset. Like that thing played out just the way Mick Cronin probably would have hoped.
Yeah, to be fair, I think that last point you made is a big credit to what UCLA did, right? The game didn't just happen to be played like that. UCLA dictated the tempo. They followed their game plan pretty perfectly, and like all the credit in the world. The hard part for Michigan is you played your worst game of the year, and yet you still had 8 shots that you missed in a row to end the game that you lost by 2 points, and 5 of those were 2 feet from the basket. So it's definitely hard to stomach that part of it, and that's just what you're going to think about now with this team. But that's all. I go back and forth because at the same time, a lot of the mechanics of this game kind of fit how I thought this team would eventually lose in the NCAA tournament, especially without Isaiah Livers. So I think we talked about on a pod maybe a couple weeks ago, like, how would you want to go out? Do you want to go out in a crazy shootout where both teams play their best? Do you want to just get beat off the court? I do think this is probably the worst way to go out as far as choices go.
Yeah, I mean, like, you're right. So much credit has to go to UCLA because the nuances of that defensive game plan were just so spot on. It for everything from how they didn't let Dickinson get to his dominant shoulder so many times. They did do a really good job. Like, Franz Wagner had a bad game, and a lot of it was on him, but a lot of it was also on the way UCLA played him. And so all of those things are true. And at the same time, like, you can't turn the ball over on a quarter of your possessions in a 59 possession game. You can't miss almost half your free throws, right? Like, to that, like, to your point that you're making there of like, it's just when you go back and it's always going to feel like, damn, one little thing goes different and Michigan wins that game and it's going to the Final Four and who knows? And right. Yeah. It probably loses to Gonzaga, whatever, but
I think we know.
Yeah, right.
I think that you'll feel a little better if you're a Michigan fan. Like, man, like, obviously it would have been a huge accomplishment for this team to make the Final Four, but that Gonzaga train is, it's
14-point favorite in
a
a 14-point favorite in a Final Four game is not something you see every day.
Yeah, if you remember that when we were in the Final Four, where was it? San Antonio. Was it San Antonio? Where Villanova just like made 25 threes against Kansas in the first game and beat the brakes off of them. That feels like kind of what this second. It's going to be the second semifinal too, right? On Saturday. It's going to be a tough tough watch. But
8:30 game in a quiet dome, and Gonzaga just off to the races, I imagine.
Yeah. So going back to the game, there's a couple places we probably can talk about. My Twitter feed is just filled with people who are like pretty upset about what Michigan ran down the stretch, who took the shots down the stretch. I have some opinions on this. What did you think of how that all played out?
I mean, without like going back and rewatching a lot of things, it's just kind of going on like my notes this morning. You know, the shots that were there, I think it's pretty hard to blame them for taking. Let's start with the Mike Smith shot. Okay. The second he's going down the court, the second that he sees Tiger Campbell turn his shoulders, green means go. You got to shoot the ball. Now, could he have gotten to the basket? Sure. They were in the bonus. You could go draw one, but that was a good shot. It was a good look. And it's a shot that Mike Smith usually would make.
I don't know about usually. It's a shot Mike Smith can make, and it's the best shot Mike Smith was going to get in that situation. You're not going to get a foul call if you just put your head down and drive into Tiger Campbell in that spot. I guarantee it. For me, I think what gets lost in the conversation is everyone points to it and says, oh, well, Mike Smith and Franz Wagner were 1 of 17 or what. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. Why would you draw up a play for them to take the shot? I think people miss out on how much
Shawnee Brown was defended for one, right?
Well, how much work it takes to create a shot. There's only 2 guys on this team. Mike Smith's the only guy you can throw the ball to at the free throw line, and he can be down the court in 3 seconds with the ball. There's no one else that you can do that with. And you can say, okay, we'll throw a baseball pass. Well, if you throw a baseball pass with 6 seconds left, you're probably running a chance of throwing the game away, where you're going to turn it over just trying to get the ball in. You don't do that in that spot, right? So I think that was the right decision there, without a doubt. And like Mike Smith just missed the shot. I don't know. I don't think you could trust anyone else on Michigan's roster to be in Mike Smith's shoes and get a better look in that situation.
I thought it was a perfectly good play call. I thought it was a perfectly good look, and he missed it. And shit happens, right?
Yeah.
The other one, the Wagner airball 3, which, by the way, I mean, I know Michigan fans don't want to hear this, but Rob Douster tweeting that he missed it by a full Mike Smith was one of the funniest things I've seen all season. So, but first of all, man, when you're in a spot where you need a shot and the opposing defense just leaves you, it's kind of hard not to take the shot, man. And basketball players have to take basketball shots. And when you're that wide open, I do get pulling the trigger. I don't think that that's exactly what was drawn up. I'm pretty sure they would have loved to have gotten a guy like Shawnee Brown, maybe a look there. But if UCLA is not leaving him, how do you suppose you get him the ball? And do you suddenly just, like I had a lot of people say, let Shawnee take that shot. Let Shawnee take that shot. Well, to kind of your point, what you're saying, shot creation, like if UCLA isn't going to leave him to let him get open, are you going to put him in a ball screen, which you really don't do? Like, how do you suppose he gets his shot? So I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure you probably watched it from every angle possible. What do you think of that play?
No, so that you kind of hit on my point at the end there. So your options, you have to do something offensively, right? Like, there's only really 2 people on the entire roster who do something with the ball to initiate the play. So you can drop a Mike Smith ball screen or a Franz Wagner ball screen. Franz Wagner, what happens from there depends on how the other team plays defense. If UCLA just stays home on Shawnee Brown, goes under the screen all the way below the free throw line and just leaves Franz Wagner wide open, he has to shoot that shot. If you ran a ball screen with Shawnee Brown, who basically doesn't run ball screens,
right?
Well, 1, they wouldn't have gone under. 2, it probably would have been a turnover. And 3, the game's over. So I don't really understand. It's not like you can just pick a player and say, all right, well, he's going to be our guy who's going to shoot the shot. And it's like a penalty kick in soccer. That's not how it works. And I think that gets lost somewhere along the way. Franz Wagner was hitting that shot over and over again the last 2 weeks of the regular season. He hit a bunch of those against Michigan State in that first game. He really carried Michigan to the finish line down the stretch with his 3-point shooting, and then he just couldn't buy a three in the NCAA tournament. It just kind of is what it is. He's always been a streaky shooter. I guess the only one I could see doing something different would have been running that last play for Shawnee Brown, because that was a play, and you're running it to get a catch and shoot. I don't know. I mean, obviously Wagner's taller, maybe has a little quicker release. It wasn't like the fact that they got that shot off was impressive in its own right. I just think that the whole just gets lost in this way of you can't just pick a name out of a hat and say that guy's going to shoot, and you lose that in the scheme of things. And
if it were that easy, they probably wouldn't have scored 49 points.
Exactly. And that also kind of leads into my bigger point. All the first 2 months of the season, what we say about Michigan over and over again, what game plan do you even use to try to stop them or slow them down, right? There's too many options. Like you can take away one thing, but someone else can beat you. That wasn't the version of Michigan that we saw in the NCAA tournament. I think there was a game plan. UCLA followed it pretty perfectly. And in a way, Michigan almost got not lucky, but Michigan faced teams who wanted to play defense how they've played defense all year. And I think UCLA was sort of a mix of a team that at times has played defense like how you should stop Michigan, but really bought into, okay, we're going to do all of these things, even if they're not what we do, because they're the best to beat Michigan. Like Florida State, LSU, they played the defense they've played all year against Michigan. It wasn't catered to stopping this team. And I think UCLA watched the games that Michigan looked bad in and executed that game plan pretty well.
What did you think of having, I saw a lot of consternation over Dickinson as the inbounder on that final play as maybe opposed to running something for him at the rim. I thought if they were going to run something at the rim, I would have thrown a lob to Johns just as me. But what did you think of that dynamic?
I'd have to go back and watch it, but I think UCLA had three guys basically standing around the basket. I mean, and Michigan actually ran a baseline out of bounds earlier in that game that got Franz Wagner a wide open layup that he missed. But I don't think you're going to get that in that situation. Like maybe it's just they got a good look for the situation. Yep. I thought so. I don't have a problem with that play call at all. I think shot doesn't go in. It is what it is.
And here's the other fact of the matter. We've been recording now for 15 minutes probably, and haven't mentioned that it was 100-point game total, and one dude scored 28 points. Like UCLA had Johnny Juzang, Michigan didn't, and that guy was awesome. He was flat awesome. What did you think of primarily going with Eli on him? I thought I was surprised. I would have put Franz Wagner on him. I watched a lot of UCLA leading up to this game, and the matchups weren't easy by any stretch, but for Michigan to figure out an answer. But I don't know if that was the right call. The two biggest shots he hit that really got him going were those back-to-back threes in the first half, and Sean D was on him. And I mean, we've said that about Sean D all season. You help off shooters, it's going to cost you in a big spot. And after he made those shots, he was just locked in and just ready to go. And I do think that'll look back as a moment where things kind of got out of control, because up to that point, Michigan had given up 4 points in 10 minutes or something like that. So that was a tough break. I thought Eli did okay, but he's giving up a half foot to a guy that's just a pure shot maker. It's just a tough spot all around. But at the same time, Franz Wagner didn't look great defensively in his matchup, I wouldn't say, and just didn't look great. It was the worst game he's played all year, I would say. So interesting decision. I mean, Juzang has lit up every other team he's played, so he's clearly just playing out of his mind to an extent. Like Derek Walton senior year type of stuff, where some of the shots he hit were ridiculous, and he's just been doing it over and over and over again. I don't know. Tough call. I really think that's the thing. They were defended shots.
Well, yeah. I don't know if anyone really had a shot in this game that wasn't defended. Like,
right.
Both teams scored under 0.9 points per possession. This was you weren't getting transition layups or anything else. This was just a slugfest of half-court execution, which is what we thought. And I think I said on the first podcast, if you make shots, you win. If you don't, you lose. And that's basically what it comes down to in a game like this.
Yeah.
I have one more question kind of about this game for you.
Mm-hmm.
So UCLA switched a lot of screens, which I feel like this is the most infuriating, like the reaction to basketball games when an offense stagnates against switching is just, it's like the most extreme reaction. It's just people get so mad because it looks different. It just seems like Michigan at its best has been a pass and move, flow, cut, score. And you saw that against Florida State. A good switching defense. And UCLA switched so much at times it almost felt like a matchup zone, right? Like they're not just switching on the ball or they're switching everything. They're switching multiple times for a one ball screen. It was confusing. And that stagnates an offense, right? Michigan is an offense that runs a lot of sets. And sets really revolve around screening and motion that you can kind of negate if you can actually get away with switching everything. And the only way to beat that, by and large, is one-on-one play. And Michigan's guards really struggled to score in those situations. And I think I've criticized Michigan for being too hard-headed about trying to play through the post at times this year. But I thought that was really the only way to go, and they just, like, Hunter Dickinson missed some shots, had some turnovers. It just kind of is what it is. But what did you think of Michigan's offense? Was there something you think they could have done differently? Or,
I mean, they had like a little bit of success kind of getting guys going to the basket. Like there were a couple times where Eli kind of broke free and was able to get a couple things off the bounce and going to the basket and getting that little scoop shot in. Was there a way to have recreated that more? I don't know. That'd probably be a question that I would ask you. But that's really the only, you're right. That's really the only thing that worked. If you're not going to make shots the way like Juzang was making, just if you're not just going to make guarded shots, that was really the only other thing that was working, along with some Dickinson. But at the same time, like UCLA was playing Dickinson really well. And some of the shots he made were hard ass shot. That bank shot he made was like, that wasn't a great look. Like that was, he made that shot, but it was still a really well defended shot.
Yeah. And I think it speaks to the fact Franz Wagner and Hunter Dickinson are like, there's a scouting report on both those guys.
Total scouting report on it. And like
Wagner's going right, Dickinson's going left. And UCLA's good enough to overplay that, and they were prepared, drawing chart, like everything, like top to bottom. I thought you could tell that their defensive players were aware of the scouting report most of the game, which is credit on a short turnaround and everything else. Yeah. After all the shit we talked about Mick Cronin to start the tournament.
And the thing, like, Michigan was it looked so bothered with the fact that, like, not only is the game so slow, right? No flow at all, no rhythm at all, no space at all, no up and down. And the notion that if you wanted to run a quick hitter to try to speed things up, there were no quick hitters. Like, just because of the way that UCLA switches, there was no getting to the half court, bang, bang, quick hit. Like that just wasn't even there. So there was no flow, and Michigan just seemed so discombobulated and just uncomfortable. And, that just maybe that manifested itself in other ways with missed free throws, with the turnovers and things like that. I don't know. But again, like the thing about basketball is that for all the complaints and the mentions and things like that, end of the day, right? Mike Smith made a hell of a play at the end of the first half to get those 2 free throws and then missed them. And so you give him those 2 free throws and you give maybe Hunter Dickinson one of his free throws, we're not having any of these conversations. And we're poo-pooing Franz Wagner's 1 for 10 night, and no one's talking about late game plays and all that. It's on to the Final Four. And that's kind of the cruelty of the game that Michigan's been on the right side of plenty of times.
Yeah, just from a pure shot quality perspective, Michigan had 25 shots at the rim. UCLA had 9. UCLA took 32 other twos. Michigan took 15. The Michigan just shot 27% on every shot that wasn't at the basket. And it's just really hard to win when you don't make any shots. And that happens. I think Michigan's shooting was always a weakness without Isaiah Livers, and it came back to bite him, right? Like, this just as frustrating, like, as much as you can say, oh, there was all these plays, like 1 or 2 plays along the way, and Michigan wins this game, and it's just a ha-ha look at that ugly game they played, and they're in the Final Four. I do think the issues that came out were the right issues, right? It wasn't like it was always going to be Mike Smith having to do too much, Franz Wagner's shot struggling, Hunter Dickinson getting overplayed to his dominant side. Those are all the things that you would have said were Michigan's weaknesses all along, and finally caught up to them in a game where they're going to be looking back on for a long time.
Yeah, I think my only question would be, like, in hindsight, maybe it takes being removed from it a little bit more, but like UCLA imposed its style on Michigan, right? Is there any way in hindsight that Michigan could have imposed its style on UCLA, that it just never got going? You know what I mean?
It's a lot easier to slow a game down than speed a game up. It's a recipe that, like, Michigan isn't. They play quick sometimes, and they'll have some quick hitters, but it's not like they're a team that plays in transition constantly. And so I think that this is just like, it's not like your SEC team that's getting slowed down. Like, Michigan has played slow games in the past, and I think that makes it even easier for a team like UCLA to just say, okay, well, we're going to dribble the ball up the court in 9 seconds. We're going to not let you get anything in transition, and that's kind of that. I don't know. I think that tempo definitely led to some of those turnovers, right? Like, even some of the turnovers were trying to run quick hitters, right? I think Eli had a charge on a little dribble handoff early in the clock, stuff like that. I don't know that you can really avoid that. And I think Michigan's been on the other side of that quite a bit in NCAA tournament runs, where they won games because they played slow and turned it into an execution battle.
Good point. Anything else you want to get into this game before we kind of look a little more big picture and touch on some offseason stuff?
No, yeah. I think we can kind of just go into sort of what your eval of the season is. Juwan Howard's second year, first NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
Pretty much hell of a year.
Shit. I mean, okay, overall, Michigan, I think, exceeded every expectation possible. I think individually you can go down the list and tick off one by one guys who exceeded their own probably individual expectations. A lot of positive things. And, you know, in terms of Juwan Howard, it looks like you'll probably be able to run it back with this staff. I don't know, you know, maybe obviously things can open up and things like that, but, you know, the carousel is not stopping, but there's been a lot of fillings. And, you know, one of the things about staying late is guys aren't really interviewing for jobs. So you can run it back, I think, with this staff for a third year. You're going to have a lot of decisions from guys on what they do. But in terms of this year, man, and it can't be overlooked how fucking hard this was.
This whole season.
From COVID to the testing to isolation to, you know, these guys didn't get to see people and had to exist in a bubble for 3, 4, 5, whatever months, and then went and moved to Indianapolis for almost 4 weeks, living in a hotel, unpaid, while chasing a championship for their school. And they came up a week short, and that sucks, but they deserve all the credit in the world.
Yeah, and I think, like, obviously an incredibly difficult year, like off the court and all, to deal with that. But I think that kind of speaks to how far Juwan Howard's been able to go in sort of building up a culture and a belief in his program that is new over these 24 months and is like, this team is almost, obviously there are some really good players on this team, but it's also kind of a mismatch of parts that was thrown together in the middle of a pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. To be able to go and get Mike Smith and Sean D. Brown on this team and then merge this whole thing into a winning team is just a ridiculous achievement, roster construction wise. And to like, there wasn't a lot of, like, they weren't even together. Like, you're talking about Zoom calls through most of the offseason. And like, this team was really connected, really from the opening game of the season. And that's really impressive. And it'll be really interesting to see how that translates to next year when it's going to be a similar, you're going to have a ton of new pieces, but they're not going to be grizzled vets, so to speak. They're going to be 18-year-old kids.
Perfect example of that, Dylan, is like talking to Martelli for the story that I did the other day, right? He brought up the point that like we're talking about it within the framework of like this year, right? In reality, it's 2 years, because this thing went off the rails last March, and when we were just kind of like bullshitting about what he wants to do, right? If the right head job opens up, what does he do if an offer comes around? Blah blah. And he's like, one thing that kind of gets discounted is I came to Michigan because I want to experience what it's like to be at a place like Michigan. And I have, but I haven't. Like, I want to know what it's like to be sitting there on May 1st, and be like, okay, what's the recruiting calendar looking like? What's, who's coming in for workouts and when and blah, blah, blah. Like, none of that has happened really within this regime and within this, Juwan Howard era. Like, they haven't had an ounce of normalcy, really. It went from the transition from Beeline to Howard right into a year, right into COVID.
And that transition, remember, it was crazy. Really late. And
really
so
late.
Everything was behind. It wasn't like you went into a full offseason. And even this offseason probably won't be – it's still going to be impacted by all that. So, if you think about it like that, it's just impressive all around Juwan Howard hadn't been in college basketball, right? Like, that's not an easy thing to just sort of navigate, and that's credit to the whole staff, but obviously just the culture that he's built. I think on the court, the stuff Michigan runs is really about, I think it's exceeded any sort of expectation, and I think the way that Michigan's offense has expanded, adapted from last year to this year, from game to game, like Michigan just runs really good shit on offense. And I think that's really enticing, like moving forward you're going to see new pieces come in, players who play differently. And I think this staff has really shown that they can come up with a way to build an offensive game plan that's going to work. And I think I think we could have saw that in his first year when he ran an offense that really featured the pieces that he was given and made that work. And now that he's pivoting, and now it's just going to be fascinating to see how they build out on that and really on what should be Hunter Dickinson's team next year, but also has all these intriguing pieces who can do very different things than players on this roster.
I mean, I think in terms of like where the game is going and all that stuff, right? Like, you can make a case Michigan's playbook has as much upside as it does the talent coming in.
Yeah, I was talking to someone who said that he would say Michigan has the most modern offense in college basketball.
Look at you. Who are you talking to somebody? Who are you talking to?
They're basically running an NBA offense in college. And like other teams might borrow an NBA play, but Michigan's really just running a pro style offense. So I think that's intriguing. And I guess the big question is, can you teach 18-year-old kids that when they're making up a majority of your rotation, and how does that look? And that'd be interesting.
Michigan skewing younger is going to be really interesting to watch, I think.
Yeah, I don't even like
them running this stuff. If it's you, Frankie Collins as your starting point guard after 2 years of watching Xavier Simpson Eli Brooks and Mike Smith basically at the wheel. We'll see how that goes, right? There's going to be a learning curve here.
Yeah, and it's going to be – I think Michigan has a really high floor defensively next year with all the length coming in with Hunter Dickinson. I mean, we were worried about Hunter Dickinson as a defensive player in the offseason, and he was a big part of Michigan being so good in the paint defensively, and he's only going to get better. I mean, he is – I don't know. Where do you stand on, like – he was a right hand away from being really, really, really good. He still is, but he also was already. Like, he hasn't really built any sort of counter this year.
Right.
But at the same time, if he can get that move in the offseason, I don't know how people are really going to stop him. I think that's a real, like, and also if you're going to bet on anyone to teach him that move,
yeah,
it's going to be the guy coaching him.
Also, anyone who has known Dickinson for a while will tell you, year 2, he's also going to step out and take a few. You're going to see that part of his game probably show a degree of evolution. I'm not saying he's going to become some stretch 5 picking and popping, taking, 2 or 3 threes a game, but I do think he will show that as a sophomore. He has that in his bag. So, yeah, I mean, do you think he tests? Because I do.
I think he probably should. I don't think. I think the last 2 months, pretty much, he's not going to be in the conversation. I would say he needs that diverse post arsenal, and right now he really is only lethally efficient when he can seal and finish. Right, like it's all about winning before he catches it, and he needs to be able to show that he can score from average position and make a play. And I would be surprised if he didn't test, just because most people in that situation probably should. But I don't see him like, all of a sudden he's gonna rise up draft boards and be a first round pick. I think he has a lot of upside if he comes back for a year, preseason All-American type of thing, right? Like he'll get a lot of attention naturally.
So I would say the reason to test is his age. And to get that feedback in terms of like what his age means in terms of his positioning in NBA eyes, right? You don't need to test to know what the NBA wants to see him improve. We can sit here and make that list right now, right? The big advantage that Michigan has in this instance is that, a big like him, you could make the case like, yeah, even if you go to G League, go on and start developing at that level. If you're Hunter Dickinson, you're going to get more probably out of developing under Juwan Howard and this system, because they're going to play you, right? Like this, he's going to get what he needs at Michigan. This will not be some lost year of a big man trying to navigate. You know what I mean? Like, and you get to be coached by Juwan Howard.
He's going to get touches. Exactly. He's going to have, like, it's a perfect situation for him to keep his progression moving forward, right? He's going to be the guy. And it's going to be all eyes on him, more touches, more everything. I think you'll see him grow as a passer. Like, there's so much he can add to his game that I think it's not like fairy tale stuff. It's stuff that he actually can do, and I think is attainable. And so I think that's a great spot for him. I would be shocked if he stayed in the draft, but I'd be shocked if he didn't test the waters and go through the process too.
Agree.
It's just really hard to look at Michigan's roster next year with any degree of certainty because there's so many, like anything could happen really, right? Like you don't know other than, and even Hunter Dickinson we're saying is not really a guarantee, but I mean, I think Juwan and him have both referred to next year at different points. It's not like he's like planning his exit, right? I think that's fair to say.
I agree. But yeah, so the guys who have decisions, right? I do think there is am I freezing a lot on you, Dylan?
Your picture sometimes, but your audio's fine. You're good.
Okay, cool. Like this dynamic of Mike Smith, Shawnee Brown, Eli Brooks,
Austin Davis.
I mean, if Austin Davis wants to do a 6th year, I suppose that'd be wild. But those three, I think you can make a case either way for each of them, and it's going to be personal preference. One thing that's worth noting is none of them really got kind of a true senior year.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't get to play in front of fans. They didn't get to hang out, with friends, be outside of the basketball team. Like, it was really, really hard. And at the end of the day, like, I think they have very real decisions, and I have no idea, but I would not be in any way shocked if at least one is back next year.
Eli Brooks last night said he's talked about it with his family, hasn't made a final decision, which seemed more like hard to read into that, but it seemed like something he's actually considering more. Like, some people could have just ruled it out in that spot, I'd say.
I'll say I'm pretty sure he's considering it very strongly.
Yeah. So that I don't know That's a really, if Eli were to come back, that's a really interesting impact on Michigan's roster. Obviously, the experience, the shooting, the defense is all great. I don't know, you need another guard, so that's a great thing, but it's just be interesting how the rotation plays out and what that means for so many young players. Is Eli a point guard? Is he a shooting guard? There's a lot to unpack if that is what ends up happening.
If I'm Juwan Howard, all I know is I'm taking it in a heartbeat.
Oh, well, yeah, of course. But here's the question. If Eli comes back and Sean D and Mike don't, do you still try to get a point guard in the portal? Or are you okay with the Frankie Collins, Eli Brooks as your point guard options?
I would probably be, if I'm going to the portal, I'm looking for a stone cold shooter. 3-point shooter. If I'm tapping that well.
If you have Eli Brooks, Caleb Houston, you still are going, you think shooting more than perimeter defense or ball handling or another big?
I think, so I don't have a scout really on Frankie Collins. Like, I suck at projecting guy. Like, is he a guy who can go and be a point guard for 28 minutes a game next year? You know better than me, but at the same time, it doesn't happen often in the Big Ten.
So even like the best freshman, like Andre Curbelo is going to be a stud and played a lot of minutes and was one of the best freshmen in the Big Ten. And his minutes were a fucking adventure. So I think you just have to realize, like, if you're going to build your whole team around a freshman point guard, there's a lot of risk baked in that. And it doesn't mean that I like Frankie Collins as a prospect, but it's a lot to just say, okay, here are the keys, go do this. And
what would be your comfort level with Eli?
I don't know.
I don't hate it. I don't hate it personally.
I don't hate, like, so you run the risk of, you need to give guys like Frankie Collins a chance. You can't just run a team on grad transfer point guards forever. I don't know if that's a sustainable long-term approach, as much as Mike Smith was a home run this year. At the same time, though, you also need to cover your bases. So it's a tricky,
Eli kind of gives you that coverage.
He does.
He can go back and forth, right? And you can give Frankie 15 minutes, 20 minutes a game on the ball, and if it's a disaster, right? Okay, you're good.
And we should mention Zeb Jackson is in that mix. I guess it depends on other roster moves. Probably, I think you might still want another guard. The other thing is, anyone who comes back doesn't count against the number, which I don't know if you want to carry 17 dudes on your roster or whatever, but at the same time, you have some flexibility in that regard. Yeah. I don't know if you shoot for the stars and just go after really, really good, like a guy who can be an all conference level guy, because there are going to be guys like that in the portal. It's going to be really interesting. I do think the pure experience of having one of those guys back would be a huge benefit for a team that's going to be just so young, learning how to play college basketball in a way that this team didn't have to. And so that would go a long way. I also think Michigan is going to have to be really careful. Like, I feel like there's almost going to be people are going to want to come to Michigan.
Yes.
And you have to take the right guys. It is like transfer portal can be tricky, and they hit the home runs last year, but you can't just, I don't know. There's going to be guys who Michigan recruited before that had disappointing years. They're going to see Michigan's success. Like, how do you evaluate those guys? It's going to be really tough to make the right decisions, not just go get guys.
Agree. I really do. Like, it's a really fine line and fine balance of what's in the best interest of now, what's in the best interest of later. And that's hard. Like, that's going to be a hard chord to strike. Because there's guys you do want to get those minutes. But it's going to be enticing when you see a guy who you're like, shit, that's a possible all Big Ten guard right there who's calling us, right? If you're in the office at Michigan, like, that's going to probably happen. I believe it already has. So, like, what do you do? I don't know the answer to that question.
I think, yeah, because it's just such a tricky thing to balance depth versus upside and everything else. And I do think the way that Juwan Howard was able to bring this team together might give you some confidence to say, oh, we can go and do this again, right? So I don't know. It's interesting. I think it depends on if there are other transfers out. You can't rule that out. And people are going in the portal everywhere. Michigan only has, six or seven returning players, but I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of attrition there, which could kind of shift your depth at any specific spot. I look at the roster, though, and I do think, like, Eli Brooks coming back would be huge for depth, but I also would think about adding another guard for depth at the very least, just because, like, if you want him to be a shooter, fine, but perimeter defender, just anything, a little more quickness, and not, like, because these freshman guards are going to have to play, and I think you just want a little cover there.
What does the end of the season, what kind of hope does it give you for Brandon Johns as a senior?
So, like, if any Michigan State fans are listening to this podcast an hour later, which I assume they're not, Rocket Watts is a pretty strong reminder that 6 good games at the end of the season do not mean everything is wonderful. It's really easy to overreact to the last 6 games of the season, especially when they're in the NCAA tournament. The stakes are high. Everyone's watching. I don't think you can just pencil Johns into the starting lineup now because he played really well. But at the same time, if he would have played really poorly, I don't know what you would have done. So it's a good sign. I don't think it changes everything. I mean, he was basically falling out of the rotation by the end of the regular season, and then this happened. There's multiple 5-stars coming in who can play the 4. There's talent. There's a lot. Terrence Williams is going to demand minutes. I think it's. I don't know where that leaves Brandon Johns, and I don't know what's best for Brandon Johns. I don't know. Do you think this was a breakthrough? He had some really, really good stretches of play in the postseason, like the best moments he's had in his career, I'd say.
So here's where I fall on it. It's, if you tell me what they are going to tell Brandon Johns they envision for him next year, I can pretty much tell you how I think it'll go. But that's the question for me. Because if it's going to be this hybrid, you're the backup 5, you're also in contention at the 4. Look, we've seen it for 3 years. It doesn't work. Like, he needs to know what he is. And it needs to be one thing. The 2-position thing, it has not worked. So if he's going to be your backup 5 to Dickinson, and he's going to be contending for minutes at the 4, look, I think it's the past is prelude on that one, right? But if it's going to be, you're the 4, I think I like his chances based on what we've seen. But at the same time, you're right. I mean, there's real talent coming in that can play that position. And if you want more of a true stretch 4 who can hit threes. Like, he's not really that, right? I mean, he can, but he hasn't. Yeah, I don't know. His upside is real. His questions are just as real.
Yeah, I mean, Diabate's going to play 4 and 5. Caleb Houston will probably be a starting 3 just based on how Michigan's roster sets up, but his best position is the 4. It's going to be mid-December, and we're going to be recording a pod about how Michigan looks so good when Caleb Houston plays the 4. You can already pencil that one into your calendar. Terrence Williams, his best position is the 4.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. You can say anything now and say, oh, you're going to be our starting 4, but it doesn't take long to look at the roster and see that there are going to be guys you're fighting for. It's not like it's going to be open season and, oh, you're getting 32 minutes a night. And I don't know where that leaves him. And I don't know, like, if you're Michigan and you're looking at these 13 guys on the scholarship chart right now, are you saying the best version of our team in March is with Brandon Johnson as starting 4? Maybe, but I don't know if that's the case.
I don't know either.
And obviously,
do you agree? What do you think about the thought on him as this split thing?
It definitely
would it be more the
worked.
same. It would be more of the same, wouldn't it?
I think it's not just the split. It's just really hard to be good consistently when you play 4 minutes a half. So I think that's part of it, and it's really the consistent playing time that I think helps him find a comfort zone as much as it is playing one spot or the other. But who's the backup 5 on next year's roster?
Austin Davis, according to you.
And Diabate will play some 5, but I guarantee Diabate is thinking he's going to play some 4.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things where how do you work through this roster and then where do you end up? And there's so much potential, but there's just way more questions, right? It was pretty easy to look at Michigan's roster coming into this year and say, okay, these are the spots that are spoken for. This is how it's going to work.
Shit, for all we know, maybe the Supreme Court blows up all college sports this week for all. Maybe it's all over.
That's a pivot.
Well, that's when every freaking tweet that's popping up on my thing is actually basketball season's over. I can probably just turn off Twitter, right? But all right, you got anything else on the way out?
No,
we'll do a whole episode on the roster and
for
the
both
freshmen
teams,
and for both teams separately, and we'll get into, Michigan State's already kind of got obviously some movement going, but we will we'll do whole episodes on all that stuff. But I just wanted to kind of set the table here. Do you have anything else though?
No, I'm really curious what Michigan recruiting looks like this summer, when really the one knock on Juwan Howard from other schools was, oh, he's never been a head coach, to now what that looks like with this season. I'm curious how that plays out. Last year was just this weird year where it was COVID and Zoom and everything else, but it does seem like we're going to have something closer to a normal live period by July, knock on wood. But
right.
It'd just be really interesting, how that progresses. And again, how the players Michigan targets, I think, will shift, and already has shifted, to be more selective about fits versus just kind of looking for sheer talent. And I'm just curious how that plays out.
Likewise. Yeah, I mean, when the G League is the other option for the best of the best, how much it does Juwan Howard's version of Michigan compete with that? Because I think it does a little bit.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Mick Cronin going in on the G League for stealing Deshaun Nix. You see that?
I did not. Mick Cronin is not one to be filtered, though.
He was very mad that they recruited him when he was committed to UCLA. Bag's the bag, Nick.
Is the G League is supposed to respect the the sanctity of a verbal commitment? Holy shit! Wow, I had no idea.
Newsflash: they don't.
Yeah, they don't. The NABC barely does. You got college coaches recruiting dudes right off other teams' rosters. You want to complain about the G League? Get the hell out of here. All right. That'll do it for this episode of The Moving Screen. We appreciate you listening all season long and through what was a very odd year. Access-wise, game-wise. Dylan hasn't seen live basketball in many moons. But we will both raise a glass to next year being a whole hell of a lot more normal. And we wish everyone good health, good shots. In the arm. And yeah, that does it. Be sure to tip your bartenders and your servers.